Hello one and all to Vision and Isle. My name is Sam and this is World Watch. Let's do some playoff reviews. This time on the docket we have the LEC, 3-team seeded situation. To note, I have my gripes about the LEC format and the way that they evaluate things and the teams that got to make it further in, which ones got it, and compared to the ones that actually got to try. And throughout the entire review, you'll see my gripes with the format that the LEC has done. Now, granted, given the international changes that are going to be happening next year, their format will make more sense, to me at least. So this particular issue may be softened next year. But as opposed for this year, I think that regardless of my issues with the format, the who managed to qualify is still good. They're still solid. Though many questions about their performance. So without further ado, let's explore not just the summer playoffs, specifically only the last four best of fives, or sorry, the only best of fives of the summer playoff, because the format again, as well as the season finals. The LEC, for those qualifying ones, played on patch 14.13 and 14.15, and giving a nice well-rounded time lapse of everything that happened from then on. If you are wondering about the actual reviews of these best of fives and why they're formatted this way, I have a TikTok where you get to see them as I watch them live, or not live, but as I watch them, I report them afterwards and put them in as soon as possible. So you get to see these early before I put up these videos. So without further ado, let's watch the LEC Summer Playoff and Season Final Best of 5 for the qualifiers. For the first time in years, Fnatic finally gets a series win against G2. To note, both teams have some interesting and creative draft choices that both help with the momentum that they wanted to play with and also make it more difficult to approach said momentum in question. G2 especially struggled with their lack of patience, caused them more grief than needed, and as they held no comeback tools within these drafts, we wound up with a team lost in the mid to late game when leads were just not there. That said, Fnatic had a different set of issues to contend with. While they are cleaner and had more flexibility and better draft choices, especially for the late game plays, their lack of proactivity in this series worries me a little bit. I say it just a little, as Game 5, their proactive play was a large factor in how they were able to cinch this series. It's only a matter of time if they can keep this up to cinch their seed to Worlds. My MVP for this series is Razork for how well he controlled each stage of each game. This was the semifinals of the summer, G2 Esports versus Fnatic. This was Karmine Corp's last chance to keep their Worlds run alive, and it just wasn't enough. From the outset, both teams hold some solid early game and great coordination. Now, Karmine Corp holds some consistency issues with, how they play around the map, set up around neutrals, and execute their different skirmishes. It's an even bigger problem when their wins rely on their opponents to fumble, which is not a great sign, especially going into Worlds, and makes sense why their run should and does end here. All the while, BDS were a much more consistent team with stronger vision play, better neutral approach, solid understanding of their win conditions. My biggest issue is how flimsy they get when they're trying to close out games that go on for far too long. Faster teams are more than likely going to be an issue for them if this isn't corrected. But as far as what has been shown, they have some great adaptability and that was present and coordination that can rival even the LEC's big two teams, and that's a great start. My MVP for this series is Ice for being the most consistent skirmisher and player on the squad. This was the LEC's round 2 lower bracket, or round 3, however you want to look at it. Karmine Corp versus Team BDS. Late game team fight difference between these two teams.
BDS continued to show us some incredible early game approaches, great coordination, and a solid understanding of how to play around neutral objectives. You combine that with their vision play, and we have a team that should be a lot faster than they have shown us to be so far. Unfortunately, they still struggle in late game stages and closing out games, leaving us with a bitter taste in our mouths. G2, for their part, are incredibly excellent at playing with their win conditions, especially around the late game. Add that with their coordination being that much better than BDS, and we have a disaster for them. But I don't like how often the early games of G2 led them to rely on their clutch coordination as opposed to consistent early game play, which could have them play a much stronger overall game. I'm hoping this gets corrected well before Worlds comes, if they even qualify for it. My MVP for this series is Caps for how much control and impact he had during the mid to late game stages in this series. This has been the low bracket semifinals of the LEC. Team BDS versus G2 Esports. Congrats to G2 on being the second team to qualify for Worlds. Fnatic falls short after showing such a strong set of early games. Between their neutral approach, solid vision, and coordination, you would think that Fnatic would have all of the winning tools to cinch this series. But come to the mid to late game transition, and something just fumbles and short circuits. Something I hope they would solve between now and Worlds, because I do see them eventually making up this particular deficit and getting one of the two other slots for the LEC. Now G2, for their part, keep showing a strong grasp of their winning conditions, late game approach, and quite honestly, very clutch team fighting. Now, while all of that is good, how they keep falling behind by so much in every early to mid game is a large concern that needs to be addressed, as no team worth their snuff is going to let them get to late game on the international stage, especially while 6 to 8k gold behind every time. My MVP for this series is Caps for how much he dictates during these particular late game skirmishes. This was the LEC Summers Finals and a rematch of G2 Esports versus Fnatic. It's not quite a qualification yet, but it might be based on G2's performance. Now, BDS find themselves again in a close but no cigar category of play. Their early game macro, general coordination, adaptability, and overall play is solid. My biggest concern continues to be their late game, which doesn't seem to have improved much at all since their last series nearly 2 weeks prior. If this doesn't shape up, even if they get one of their other two slots, they'll struggle a lot more on the international stage. Now, Fnatic on their end are a lot more precarious, showing signs of warm-up games, but fixing those issues within those games very quickly. There's a lot of mispositioning, strange early game choices, but push comes to shove by the game 3, their vision, neutral setups, and especially mid to late game macro play is top notch. And it helps a lot with their coordination that, to me, if G2 wins the next LEC series, they'll deserve the qualification to Worlds. My MVP for this series is Humanoid, who managed to be a consistent nuisance to BDS. This is the LEC Season Finals Round 1 upper bracket. Team BDS versus Fnatic. Fnatic will have to work a little more for that slot. G2 continue to give us some question marks around their early game play. They have some incredible late game macro plays, solid coordination, and individual outplay options, on top of the clutch factor that they keep showing, allowing for plays that are fantastical but should not have ever needed to exist in their context. Their lackluster early game and slight adaptability issues are the most apparent in this series, and really needs to be corrected before Worlds happens. Mad Lions, for their part, impressed me immensely from their early game approach, solid adaptability, superb neutral plays, and this is a team that is for sure Worlds ready, but there is some consistency issues at play. They struggle with closing out games, and their coordination is rather questionable, leading to inability to play around some of the more creative drafts. Cleaning up some of those issues will make this team a force to be reckoned with. My MVP for this series is Merwin for each strange pick making G2 squirm. This was LEC Season Finals
Round 1 upper bracket, G2 Esports versus Mad Lions Koi.
Ooh, situations like these that make me hate the LEC format more and more. Just imagine if this was Karmine Corp instead of SK Gaming. SK fooled me in game 1. Right? They showed some strong early gameplay with some decent coordination and macro approaches, but struggled when it came to the late game play. I thought, cool, this could be a mirror matchup. Both of these teams seem to have similar strengths and weaknesses. Oh, but what a fool I was. This was more of a BDS series to lose, as that was a game with regular fumbles from them, more than they were successes from SK Gaming. Team BDS are still showing some signs that they could be world caliber, but the inconsistencies are still there. The late game is still all over the place, but their coordination still holds up, and I just want them to clean things up if they even want a chance at making it to Worlds. My MVP of the series is Ice, who is in constant fire without ever being touched. This is the LEC season final, round 1 lower bracket, SK Gaming versus Team BDS. Have I mentioned how much I hate the LEC format? Imagine Karmine Corp instead of GiantX for this series. Because GiantX don't show much of worth within this matchup. There's a clear win condition they play for, and there's some early game neutral play that is pretty serviceable, but no leads are ballooned, very little proactivity exists once the mid game rolls around. This looks like a team that practiced the first 8 minutes of play a lot and very little of anything else. G2, for their part, show that they are good at coordination, ballooning leads, and strong mid to late macro play, but we already knew that. If anything, this series didn't quell any concerns that I had with their over-aggression, inconsistent early game, and frankly bizarre micro choices. Those were still there, but up against a team with no backbone or any capability of properly punishing them. Which is not a great look for a team that has already qualified for Worlds and needs to polish things up to even have any confidence to represent the LEC. My MVP for this series is Caps, who seemed like this was all work and no play this time. This was the LEC season finals, round 1, lower bracket, GiantX versus G2 Esports. Congratulations to Fnatic and Mad Lions Koi on being the 7th and 8th team to qualify for Worlds, with G2 winning this one series. I hate the LEC format so much. BDS play their hearts out. From solid neutrals and coordination, some great vision play, their fundamentals are fantastic. But they still haven't corrected for their inconsistency with late game play. If they control any lead, it's solid and patient, and while behind, they become erratic and reckless. G2, for their part, frustrate me to no end because they play some of the best macro around, some solid neutrals themselves, incredible coordination, but it's always so inconsistent and still requiring warm-up games. And I won't be convinced that G2 will perform well at Worlds so long as this is a problem with them. My MVP for this series is Caps, who, in spite of his history, is still the most consistent player on this squad during this run. This was the LEC season finals, round 2 lower bracket. This was a rematch and the 4th reverse sweep of the summer. Team BDS versus G2 Esports. Sometimes you're just left baffled on how a series will end. Mad continue to impress, but with some looming questions. Their early macro play, ballooning leads are all solid, neutral approach all well and good, coordination is on par with what we'd expect with a team qualified for Worlds, but they make their lives way too difficult with the lack of adaptation from game to game and some strange drafting choice. I would hope that some reconsideration towards simpler drafts and polishing some of their late game coordination would make this team a force to be reckoned with. Now, Fnatic are also showing us some incredible vision play, neutral approach, and mid to late game coordination with regards to their macro and skirmishing. I have some concerns about their inconsistent early game and how much they let their opponents gain leads, but they bounce back
often enough that it's only a matter of time before they face a team that will actually balloon leads against them if they fumble at all in the early game. My MVP for this series is Oscar Innen, who held so much influence and control around skirmishing. This was round 2 of the upper bracket. Mad Lions Koi versus Fnatic in the LEC. Where was this G2 the last time these teams faced off? Mad Lions have only impressed me so far, even as they hold just the 3rd seeds going into Worlds for the LEC. From strong coordination and early game approach, solid ballooning of leads, and excellent vision play, I think that the Mad Lions will do great at Worlds, and it's just a matter of how much they patch up their adaptability, micro errors, and overzealous aggression. G2, for their part, continue to frustrate me. The warm-up game itself made me think that they would still continue to play their inconsistent ways we've seen the entire season final, but from game 2 on, it was just the G2 we expected from the start. With excellent macros, strong coordination, neutral plays like no other, vision, and every single thing well thought out. If that is the G2 we see at Worlds, we will have a great treat on our hands. But I need them to be like this in the finals first for me to be convinced to see them like this at all during Worlds. My MVP for this series is Yike, who controlled so much of the early game tempo to propel G2's success. This was round 3 of the lower bracket of the LEC season final and a rematch. Mad Lions Koi versus G2 Esports. A thesis statement on how to win all 4 titles of your region. Both of these teams have faced off 3 times during the qualification process of Worlds, and 2-1 in favor of G2 makes sense given how these teams play. Fnatic still shows some of the more solid approach around neutrals, coordination, vision, and their win conditions, but nothing has been done to correct their early game woes, inconsistencies, and lack of proactivity. When they have a lead, they push it to its limits, and when they have a deficit, they struggle to bounce back. And if it weren't for G2's inconsistencies, it would likely be more drastic, this particular issue. G2, for their part, are by far the best team the LEC has produced on their good days, and one of the worst on their bad days. And it seems when it counts for titles in the LEC, they are at their best. There is something magical about how they leverage various macro targets, neutral setups, and skirmishes to force their opponents into bad decisions, but individual micro errors and overall inconsistencies leave me still hesitant of how they'll do on the international stage. My MVP for the series is Yike for how much he controlled and enabled G2 around neutrals. This was the grand finals of the season, finals of the LEC, and the second rematch, Fnatic versus G2 Esports. And we say congratulations to our 3 LEC representatives, G2, Fnatic, Mad Lions Koi, and quite frankly, these 2 great picks. Fantastic. There's some question marks about their ability to fully go the distance. I honestly would expect them to perform well, but being a top 8 team is a very strong stretch to push for them, as a pitch for them. The matter of fact is that Mad Lions were not on my radar at all going in, and I'm very surprised, beautifully surprised by their performance as we saw them. Fnatic was on my radar, and frankly, I'm kind of happy that they kept up with consistency, not happy that they couldn't cinch it at the end. But that's just a factor that happens, especially with a team like G2, who at their best look like a top 8 team, and at their worst look like they should not even go through play-ins. So, in regards to how the LEC is sending in, I say good asterisk could be better. And I don't want to blame this on the format specifically. There seems to be other factors at play here, given the stylistic approach and how much is dedicated specifically to for lack of a better term, to beating these guys. Because some of the choices feel like they're less efficient, but when you look at the playstyle overall, they're successful against them when they're not at their best. So if people want to beat these teams, mimic these two. But those are my thoughts, at least. I would want to hear your thoughts. What were your favorite best of fives out of the summer playoffs and season final playoffs? As well as your expectations. How do you think they're going to do? Are these good representatives for the LEC? Kind of the stock standard same. We've seen these teams on the international stage often. Love to hear your thoughts, everything and in between. Thank you again for watching. I greatly appreciate it. And with that, I will see you all next time.